With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Leonard Peikoff.
Good evening. I'm going to start the 4 questions with some more or less random reminiscences of events or experiences that I've had with Ayn Rand, and then afterwards I'll just open it to questions on anything that pertains to her that I would know. Marianne Sears, by the way, asked me to say that she's doing better and she wishes she could be here, sends her best to everyone, and invites you to come to see her in April in New York. She'll be giving her version of Reminiscences. I'm going to start with a serious toned story and then come to more hopefully humorous. This goes back to 1966. I have to say I was not happy at that point. I had made a lot of goals that I expected to reach by the time I was 30 and had achieved none of them. And you could say I was having an early midlife crisis. In any event, I was scheduled to give the first course on the objectivist theory of knowledge, at which she would be in attendance. And I did not understand it. Her theory of concepts had just appeared in print. I found it very difficult at that time to integrate and understand. And so what could I do except go to her and ask? I asked her, I said, I have a tremendous favor, but I'd like to meet with you on a pretty regular basis for a while in order to understand the objectivist theory of knowledge, which I have to lecture on. It wasn't just a question. I had a whole... and so I didn't know what her reaction would be. And she said, well, I will agree if you do me a favor. So I tried to think, what, favor could I possibly do? And she said, you have to come for the same number of sessions so that I can help you with your unhappiness. Now, I thought that was so typical of her generosity. And I ended up going for 2 separate weekly sessions. And she did solve my problem, and she did, at least at that point, help me understand the theory of knowledge. That took me another 10 or 15 years. But that was her idea at that point of a trade. She taught me a lot of things about how to judge your own self-esteem. I'll give you just a couple of examples. She asked me at one point, what was my ambition as a child growing up? What did I want to be? And I cringed inwardly at that because she knew what she wanted at 9, and her heroes had these passions for these exalted careers. But I had to tell her the truth, so I said, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I was very embarrassed to say this. I wanted to be a translator for the United Nations. And I thought, wow, this is the most mindless, leftist approach, and she'll flip out when she hears this. And her first question was, why? So I said something, it deals with all the world issues and world problems, and this would be, I thought this was a way at that time of solving the problems. So she said, you weren't content just to get a job in Winnipeg. And I said, oh no, it had to deal with the whole world and solve the problems. So of course, she looked at me and she said, but that's what you're now doing. So in other words, it was the same career to become a philosopher, but this was the adult form, as she explained it, of what I had originally thought of in childish terms. So I felt a lot better after hearing that. And the moral that she drew from it was never criticize yourself without full knowledge of what was the meaning of an event or a reaction or an emotion to you in the context of your life at the time. Now, I can give you other examples of that, but well, maybe I'll give you just, I have no structure here, so. I'll give you an example that's partly that and partly shows you how easy she was to get along with. You know, she had the reputation of having a fiery temper. As soon as you disagree with her, she would cut you to ribbons. So we were once talking about novels that we liked, and I said to her, I don't know why I said it, but it came up. I said, well, I really liked Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. And of course, he is a naturalist, and the whole thing was very bleak. I thought to myself, what, is going to happen now? And she simply asked, well, why? What did you like about it? And it was pretty easy to say. This was a young man searching for the meaning of life and trying to explore every different kind of philosophy. Now, according to Mom, there is no meaning of life, so the quest was, a failure. But he dealt with fundamental questions, and he was trying to find out what it was all about, and that is what held me. So, of course, she explained why that was perfectly legitimate. And I said to her, well, isn't that subjective then? Anybody can like anything because of their context. She said, no, it's not. If you're able to state, I like this element for this reason pertaining to my life, but looking at the work as a whole, it's not good for such and such reasons. That would then be objective. So she was totally calm about that. And I'll give you an example of the reverse. I went to a movie at that time called Wild as the Wind, which starred the Italian actress Anna Magnani, who was a lot like Ayn Rand in temperament and in appearance, and who I was really attracted to. Anna Magnani. And I went to this movie, and I never took my eyes off her. I never saw the rest of the movie. And I thought, oh, but this, and I came back, and she said, how was it? I said, it's absolutely fabulous. It's the greatest movie ever. You've got to see it. And I think about 2 days later, she called me, and she said, what was the name of the movie? And I told her, it was that one about the sheep? And I had forgotten there was a scene of the birth of a lamb and blood and all kinds of stuff. And it was all just meandering folks on a farm. And I just discounted all that, because I was focused on the actress. And she was really indignant that she was made to go and see that by somebody that she supposedly respected my judgment. And there was a case, you see, where I was taking a small element and making it the whole movie, and that she didn't tolerate at all. So that's some idea of how she would react. But people are entirely wrong in thinking that if ever you said something that went against her ideas or values, she would explode. That was not true. Sometimes she would, but it would depend on what you said and what the context was. Now, I'm just going to jump to a memory about her and her husband. They were really inseparable. At any party, and I went to I don't know how many with her, she would always sit on the couch next to him. And if she got to the party early because he was painting or something, and she was on a couch, surrounded by, so that there was no room, it was just automatic that you had to make room for him to sit next to her on the couch. So they were, in that way, always together. And she had this custom on New Year's Eve. She regarded it as a very important a holiday. And she had the custom, in a few minutes before midnight, she would go in a room. She always gave a New Year's Eve party, which was always couples who followed this custom. And I went without a date. But the custom was that she would go in another room with her husband, and a couple minutes before midnight, they would start to kiss. And they would kiss right on through into the new year. And that was kind of like a reaffirmation. By the way, all the couples in the party used to do that. And there was only 2 people there without dates. on a regular basis, me and Alan Greenspan. And we just looked at each other and shook hands and waited for everybody else. Anyway, one year, Frank was in the hospital over that week. It wasn't anything, life-threatening, but he had to be in the hospital over New Year's Eve. So the question was how she was bound and determined that she was going to go through that same custom at the hospital. But, in New York, it was like 40 or 50 blocks away, and it's impossible to get transportation on New Year's Eve in Manhattan. You can't do it. You can get to the hospital during the day, but to come home, at midnight or 1 a.m., it's impossible. So, but she wasn't intended to do it. So I had to check into, not I had to, but I volunteered to check and see if there was any way she could possibly be transported back. Called various cab companies. They said, that's ridiculous. It's impossible to reserve a cab. And then one of them told me, he said, there is a 30-second window at exactly midnight. He said, everyone is drinking champagne and saying Happy New Year, and there are no calls for cabs. But after 30 seconds, they all want to move to the next party, and there are no more cabs. So he said, what you have to do is get your call in within that 30-second window. So I waited till 5 seconds. I had set my time to 5 seconds, got in, and the guy said, sure, there's no problem. I got the cab, went to the hospital, and picked her up. She had had her ceremony, with Frank, and she was perfectly happy, and I got her home. Just some miscellaneous things here. When I read Atlas Shrugged, I had the privilege and the responsibility of reading it with her, either in the room or in the next room, when she would then come out and say, you make your comments, and if you missed something or you didn't comment on something, she'd say, well, you didn't say anything about that, or what did you think about this? So this was early in Atlantis. And when I finished the sequence, I commented and everything, and she said, oh, what did you think of my Alfred Hitchcock touch? I had no idea what she meant. Alfred Hitchcock, probably people here are too young to know, used to always have a glimpse of himself in each movie. He'd be like a man climbing a train, or he'd be a stranger waving. There'd be 1 second of him, and she said, I said, what do you mean? She said, you didn't see me? I deliberately put it in. I had no idea what she meant. I'm embarrassed to tell you. So she said, well, it was the fishwife that looked at Galt with eyes of longing and had been a writer in the outside world. And my immediate reaction was indignity. I said, oh, you said she was young. I mean, it just came out of me. I didn't even think. Now here's one from her cat, Frisco. Was a very well-behaved and omniscient-looking cat, so she used to call him a professor of epistemology. But somebody, I had no recollection of whom, left a modern art oil painting. It was how shapes and so on. I don't know whether it was given to her or it was just being left off. I have no idea how it got there, or even whose it was, but all I know is there was this painting, and it was propped up against a wall on the floor, and obviously she was going to get rid of it. And she told me with delight, she said, do you know what Frisco did? He raised his leg and peed on it and streaked the whole thing. And she said, he is not only an epistemologist, he's an esthetician. And he never did that to any other painting. Now, I don't know. I tried to check this one out on the internet today, and there's just no information. But apparently in the 20s or 30s, when she was first in this country, she was enamored of double talk because of the idea of the words that almost said something, but they failed to say anything. And she must have heard, I'm just guessing this, a routine over the radio and written away for the script, because she memorized entirely, like a 6 to 8 minute monologue in double talk. And she would deliver it, at parties, if you asked her to. It was absolutely hilarious, particularly because she would deliver it with the intonations of the indignant man, and it kept sounding like I was going to say something, then it wouldn't, and there was some profanity in it, and all of this with her Russian accent. So, and just the idea of Ayn Rand giving a performance in double talk. So we all remember the first line, and I checked around. Nobody can remember anything but the first line of it. And the idea, so I'll tell you the first line, you get the idea of it. But it went on for 6 or 8 minutes. It's about a guy who checks in at a hotel, and they tell him they'll send his bags up to his room. And he goes up to his room. He's waiting and waiting. And he's getting madder and madder. He picks up the phone and asks to speak to the manager. And the manager comes on, and this is the first sentence of the monologue. "It's damn seldom what happens to my luggage around here." Now, if you think of that, it doesn't connect. As you sort of get an idea what he means. And she went on like that for 6 or 8 minutes. It was absolutely hilarious. I just wish that, and I checked today in the internet. We tried to Google it. I put double talk, then I put double talk luggage, and all I got was, "We have the greatest luggage, and that's not double talk." So couldn't get it. But if anybody can track that down. Now this one is just doesn't really reveal anything about her. It's just an episode that happened. The context is that we had a lot of weird people in those days that were following her, and sometimes me. They were really out of it. I had a guy, for instance, who lived in Boston, who used to call me and say he was Telemachus, and that he knew the real secret of objectivism, which was that I was somebody else, I won't mention who. He was completely crazy. So we had that type of people, so we were on the alert for them. Anyway, I was in her apartment one evening. I think her husband was in the bedroom. And there was a knock on the door. So she was always very cautious who was there. She went, you have this thing that you can talk through the door. And she said, "Who is it?" He said, "It's Jupiter." So we thought, oh, Jesus, one of them got up. So she said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "This is Jupiter." So she got, pretty angry, but within like a 7 out of a scale of 1 to 10. And told him to get away, leave her alone. She was going to call the doorman, etc. But she said this in a pretty loud and definitely angry way. So the guy left. About 10 minutes later, the door, you hear the bell again. She said, "Who is it?" She says, "It's Jupiter." She said, "Are you back again?" He said, "I've got something for you." Well, that's all you have to hear. So she went through the same thing, but more intensely. I'm going to call the doorman, I'm going to call the police, etc. And obviously he had to be scared away so he disappeared. And we were, thinking, these crazy people, how do you even get past the doorman? And about, I think, 20, 25 minutes later, she got a telephone call from her attorney. And he said, "Did you get the documents that I sent you?" She said, "No, what documents?" He said, "I sent them by Jupiter Messenger." we looked at each other, and we were sheepish, and at the same time it was funny. So, what that poor man must think. I often wondered, he must go around telling people, I had this completely crazy customer. Now, I'll just give you one last one here. We had one evening, a group of us, she was there, a satire on the contemporary philosophic articles, the titles that appeared in the journals. They were all minutiae, tiny little picky things. You would never put together two facts, everything was just one little tiny nothing. And it was, I think what prompted it was, I had recently been interviewed for a job at the University of Michigan. And they asked me what my dissertation was on, and I said, well, I was defending the thesis that the laws of logic are truths about reality. I said the sentence, the laws of logic are truths about reality. And this guy's named Alston, William Alston was the chairman. And he said, oh, you used a really interesting word there. I'd like to hear your analysis of it. So I said, laws, logic, truths, reality. I thought, wow. So I'm trying to prepare which one of those four is it. So I said, well, which one? He said, about. So I thought he was kidding. I actually did. And I said, about? I said, is that a joke? And he looked at me and said, you never read Goodman's article called About? So I said, no, I didn't. So, of course, I didn't get the job. But I told her the story, and it came up some evening when we were all sitting around. And so we started making up these typical titles for analyst articles. So, of course, some obvious ones were of, and there was on, and then Ayn came up with the really good one, which I bet they would publish, which she meant, of course, obviously sarcastically, a thought on ought. And then we went into how they would present, her views. And it would be Ayn Rand on, some minor thing, and then on some more minor thing. And she finally burst in and she said, why not just Ayn Rand on BS? And Marianne Sears was there, and she couldn't resist, and she piped up and she said, and then for a sequel, you could do PS on BS. Now, that's basically what I was going to tell you. I was going to have, so that's a few minutes longer than I was going to do, but that gives you some, I don't know what that is. So now, if you have any questions, it's yours. Yes, sir.
I guess at some point in your life you were struggling with a career choice, and I'm interested in what Ayn Rand thought about your choices and what advice she might have given you and your perspective on you at that time and your values and your talent.
Well, that's too much. I'll confine it to career. First of all, she would never give advice on a subject like that, because that would be like giving a person advice on whom to marry. It's an extremely personal thing, and she knew that she carried a lot of weight, in my mind and in the people around her, and she would never make use of that, especially because she would say, I have no way of knowing what, you would be happy at. You have to know yourself. So I would never ask for that, and she would never volunteer it. But we did have a conversation early years in which I was saying, I'm trying to figure out what skills I have, or what talents I have that would, point me in some direction. And she said, well, one thing you might consider is that you're very good at arguing. So maybe law would be a good thing for you. But it was only in that way, not as she was recommending it. I had a lot of trouble getting into philosophy because I did not understand what the professors were talking about. And I thought that was a flaw because everybody else in class seemed to understand. And I didn't see how I could go into a field where I didn't know what anybody was talking about. Until she finally convinced me that they didn't either. But that's why it took a long time. I don't know if that answered you, but that's, yes.
Did you ever have contact with Alan Greenspan?
Now?
Yeah.
Oh, no. The last I had any contact with Alan Greenspan was in 1982, which is when I finished The Ominous Parallels. And I contacted his office for a quote that I could use in the, advertising publicity. And they said, you write the quote and send it in to us, which I did, and he said, fine. That's the last I heard.
Class of 43, only you and Marianne Suries stayed consistent with the philosophy the whole time, with unbreached commitment. And I'm wondering if you had any insights about the others.
Oh, well, I don't think you want to go into what's wrong with the others.
Well, let me ask you a hypothesis then. I wonder if a person has a hidden agenda which is ahead of reality is what it is.
Well, I'm sure that's true of anybody that's no good. I think the best thing to say is this. Marianne and I had two qualities. And that combination was not present. We were both honest, and we both took philosophy very seriously. Now, for me, it was a profession. For Marianne, it wasn't. But she was basically like a reverend about philosophy. She never wavered in how important and how intensely she held it, how important the subject was to her. There was no one else to whom it was that important. You see, there are people that are interested in philosophy as a phase in growing up, the way they might be idealistic as a phase. And then usually either a failure or a success destroys them. Failure because they become malevolent, or success because they become popular, and they don't want to rebel against society. So it's very difficult to find someone who starts off young, enthusiastic, philosophical, and holds on to that as the years go by. It's a very rare thing. So I don't think Ayn Rand is in an unusual position in that regard. I think most famous people, if they have anything good or serious about them, are surrounded mostly by inadequate followers, put it that way. And the good ones are an exception. Yes, in the back.
Well, you have a great love for poetry. Did Ayn Rand have the same interest in poetry that you did? Did you talk about it?
I'm sure she did, and I'm trying to think. The awful thing is that I benefited a great deal, and at the same time missed out on a lot from Ayn Rand, because I had a single-minded agenda. And no matter how often I saw her, or even for 8 hours at a time, I had that single agenda, and that was to understand the objectivist philosophy. It was the very first night I met her, I had the double reaction at the very same moment that what she is saying is self-evident and unintelligible. That it's obviously true and I don't understand it, because it conflicted with everything. And I set myself as basically my life mission to understand her philosophy. So I didn't really take advantage of, her full mind and resources the way you would think in 31 years. Because I would, well, the next time I saw her, I'd want to talk about the census. And then I'd have 1,000 follow-up questions. And then I want to talk about free will. You know, I'm not to say that we didn't have personal conversations, but it's not like I explored literature with her or I explored history. That would all be tangential. It's just not impressed on my mind now. She liked some Ogden Nash, that I know. But I'm think of more serious Kipling. Oh, I know she liked Kipling. She liked When the World's Last Painting. What was that one? The World's Last Picture was painted. And she loved If. That I know. And who else did she like? I just never discussed poetry with her, not that I can remember. But, you know, my memory is not that great, so I'm not sure. Yes?
When you and Miss Rand...
Oh, I thought you were going to... Somebody know anything about her poetry views.
Swinburne also.
Swinburne, that's right, yes. She liked Swinburne. Now, who... No, what?
Alexander Bloch.
Alexander Bloch, I never heard of him. Oh, okay. I think she told me once that, who is that Shakespeare of Russia? Pushkin, yeah. That she thought his writing was very good. But I don't know if that's... You know, she read the complete works of Shakespeare in Russian. Everything. You know, and she knew it all, too. Because I remember her explaining Othello to me when I had to teach it. Well, that's all I can say. But thank you, Shoshana. Yeah.
When you and Miss Rand and other members of the collective were sitting around talking, sometimes late evening, did she ever try to limit the conversation? Did she ever get bored with a particular area, like, say, politics, and not want to talk about it?
I never saw her bored. I just can't think of her being bored. There would be times when she would say openly, let's not talk about that. You know, it's too negative. Or, for instance, she never wanted you to go home after a negative discussion. Like, even if you had a variety of different things, but the last topic was negative. You said, well, I have to go. She didn't want you to go. She said, well, let's first say something of a more cheerful or positive kind. And, you know, sometimes you have to rack your brain, especially because you were still in the negative mood, you know. But it helped, you know, it got you out of it. So she would say, you know, let's change the subject, or... but I never saw her, you know, she would speak up right away if it was in her apartment. No, that's true. I just remember, she got bored sometimes at parties. She was not, she much preferred one-on-one or one-on-a-few with a deliberate topic being discussed rather than, you know, cocktail parties and sitting around, etc. So sometimes I saw her bored there, but never, I was thinking of her in her apartment. She was always totally animated, always. Yes?
Did Ayn Rand have passages of her own work that were her sentimental favorites?
Oh, yeah. But, like, you mean within the Fountainhead or Atlas?
Yeah.
I know she did, but it's hard for me to remember. I think the train ride was one of her favorites. Because until that, as I was reading it, I kept making references to, this is just like the Fountainhead, and that reminds me of so-and-so in the Fountainhead. And she said, yes, yes. And after I got to the train ride, I said, I can't make references to the Fountainhead anymore. And she said, I understand why. You know, so that was, I know that was an important part to her. I think the drama of the slap in the face scene, you know, of Reardon and Francisco. I think Galt and Dagny making love under the tunnels, that was one of her favorites. She told me that in the Fountainhead, that when she was writing the scene where Rourke and Winan said goodbye, she was crying as she wrote it. What else? You have to remind me of. She liked everything she wrote, believe me. Yes. So it's just an edge here, what was her special favorites, but there was nothing in there, in those novels, that she thought was less than perfect or could have been improved, so it was just an issue of personal. She liked real drama, like, for instance, when she thought of We the Living, the first thing that she thought of that created the whole novel was Andre finding Kira's dress in Leo's apartment. That was the first scene she had any idea of. And as soon as she got that, she wanted to do the novel, because that kind of drama was what attracted her to fiction. I'm sure there's a lot I'm leaving out, but that'll give you some idea. Yes?
This afternoon, we heard you perform movies. The Dr. Leonard had.
Yeah.
I was very impressed. I didn't even know you played piano.
I don't.
Did you play piano for her at any other times? I mean, or was this?
Well, no, none of us had pianos in the apartment, and I couldn't play. I took lessons till I was 16. And then, I played like from the guitar chords. I could play popular songs. Did he tell you how that record came about? Well, I know I told this story in my biographical tape. So should I? Well, that was. You'll forgive me if I'm repeating myself, which I obviously am. If you've already heard it, but she loved this tiddlywink music. And she had 3 pieces of sheet music that were the music to a song called Mookie aus Kentucky, I guess Mickey from Kentucky, that she brought with her from Russia, which is one of her favorite songs, but it was never recorded. So I asked her, can I just borrow the music to look at it? So, which I thought saying, what I had in mind. So I brought it home. And I had a small piano, I guess. Well, I was rooming with someone who had a small piano at the time. And I learned it, as well as I could learn it. And I decided I'm going to make a record of it and give it to her. But in those days, there were no home recording cassettes or nothing like that. So the only way you could make a recording was to go to a studio with a professional engineer and rent the time. So I found the studio near Carnegie Hall that you could get a minimum of 1/2 hour, which is some outrageous price, I can't remember. So I went in and I told them, this is a 3-minute piece, but I'm not going to be able to play it without making major mistakes. So every time I make a mistake, I'm just going to quit and start over again, with the idea that if I can make one, cut that's reasonable in the 30 minutes, and I did play nonstop for 30 minutes, and we decided that 2 cuts were usable. They had mistakes, but they weren't hopeless. So I took that and brought it to her place the next time I saw her, and it was wrapped as a gift. She said, "Oh no, you know that I don't accept gifts." She was on this idea that we were all students and she didn't want us spending our money on her. But I said, I'm sure you'll take this one if you open it. So she opened it. She screamed when she saw it. And she rushed to the phonograph and played it over and over with her baton conducting it. And that was without doubt the best gift I ever gave her, and that's where that record came from.
I thought it was wonderful.
Well, thank you, but that's it. That's my repertoire. Yes.
Dr. Peikoff, I was curious about when Rand was writing Atlas Shrugged, and members of the collective would gather together to read the novel in manuscript. Can you tell us more about exactly how that worked?
Well, we didn't read it. We didn't read the ink. We read it typed. Because her handwriting, she'd have all kinds of corrections and so on, so she wouldn't show that to anybody except the typist.
Did everybody come over like at the same time?
Yeah, it used to be every Saturday, I think at 8. There was like a dozen people, and there would be a copy and would just be passed. The pages would be passed around, and we'd wait till everybody had read it. And then we could, talk about it, ask questions, discuss it, what we liked, etc.
How long did those sessions normally last?
Well, when there was a whole group, it usually would go from 8 to 1, maybe 1:30, something like that. This is Saturday night. And then she would serve something, around 11, either pastry or sandwiches, coffee, something like that. That went on for a long time. And then, but there was no reading for 2 years, which were the 2 years it took her to write Galt's speech. So we had read the whole book up to then. And then there was nothing that we could read for 2 years. And then finally, that was, she finished that in 55, I think. Or no, 50, I can't remember. Somewhere in the mid-50s. Then, of course, that was the total rest of the time, just being able to ask questions about Galt's speech. And I remember those vividly, because that was my direct meat and potatoes, understanding objectivism. So I took in everything in those sessions. And she tried to prepare us for, what the reception of the novel would be. And I totally didn't believe it. I said at the time that I was really disappointed that I was born when I was, because I'd want, a lifetime crusade, and here the battle was all over when I was just starting. And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, people read Atlas Shrugged, that's it. Everyone is going to agree, and there's going to be..." She tried to disabuse me. I thought, it's just impossible, and I was just totally stunned for a long time. I could not believe the comments and the reactions. And finally, you had to believe it. Yes?
Ayn Rand had a lot of critics. What insights do you have into how she dealt with that? What did she find funny or crazy, or what comments do you have?
Well, I think the main thing that she felt in regard to her critics was either their insignificance or their being contemptible. She had a very, very low opinion of people who misrepresented her ideas. She didn't object if someone, which happened occasionally, gave an accurate presentation and then, said they disagreed and this is crazy, etc. But what they would do is distort horribly, and usually sarcastically, the actual content of the book. Here's one example on a different book. When the For the New Intellectual came out, one of the big magazines, either Harper's or one of the big ones like that, had a review in which they report, her essay For the New Intellectual, she was discussing what's wrong with the perceptual level, said that she was against sense perception. I mean, that is the way her ideas were reported. Oh, and another one said the theme of Atlas Shrugged was in defense of well poisoning. Well poisoning. In other words, poisoning people, putting poison in wells because it was totally against altruism, therefore it was for slaughtering people. And that's now, what are you going to say about a review like that? I mean, you can't say, my feelings are hurt. I mean, this guy is obviously a swine, and there's no more than you can say than that. Now, she had basically one review in her life, which she totally was pleased by, and that was, what's her name on the Fountainhead? Lorraine Pruitt. Was that her name? Yeah. who wrote a review in the New York Times of all places, and praised her for her ideas. And but that was really very, very rare. Now there were, without mentioning any names, certain very gushy conservative columnists who gave very gushy reviews, all favorable, but also contentless. And she had the same attitude toward them. It's meaningless, it's insignificant, It has no relation to her work or to herself. Yes?
Yes. Did Miss Rand ever discuss with you in depth her vast researches into philosophy and into life in terms of the connection between mathematics and concepts?
No, she did not. She was studying mathematics. She had a tutor that was teaching her. I believe her last lesson was on positive and negative something. Numbers? I'm not sure. Or maybe it was something more advanced than that, but it was something to do with positive and negative polarities. I don't know. And she had been friendly with a neurologist with whom she talked at some length about the brain. So she was, she was pursuing, but I was out of that altogether because, I wasn't in on that. I wasn't especially interested in that, and I was still trying to understand objectivism. So I was absolutely monomaniacal. That's it. And it's a good thing I was, because it took me 30 to 40 years. So, to really understand in the sense that understand.
The Merry Widow.
I'm sorry.
The Merry Widow, was that Ayn Rand's favorite?
No.
Not at all?
Absolutely not.
I hear that.
I don't know where you heard that. Ayn Rand loved operetta, but she thought Franz Lehar, who wrote The Merry Widow, had some nice melodies. So she didn't, hate him or dislike him, but he was not her favorite. By the way, why The Merry Widow is so widely praised, it's not the best of his at all. There was some error by his estate, I believe. They didn't copyright it internationally. That one operetta, so all the promoters in this country can get it without paying a royalty. And that's why that's all they ever play is The Merry Widow. It has nothing to do with the quality. But no, her top favorite composer of operetta was Emmerich Kalman, Kalman. And if you like operetta at all, that's the one you should listen to way before Lehar. There was two kinds of pieces that he wrote in his operetta: lyrical, where the singer, the soprano, and the tenor, said how much they loved each other, or the jazzy, the fast, popular with a little Hungarian schmaltz, but very melodic and fast rhythm. And she liked those, and I liked the lyricals, because we each liked the other. So we would listen to Kalman operettas, and then she'd say, okay, now comes one of yours, and now comes one of yours. But if you like operetta at all, then you should get Gypsy Princess, which is one of our Chartesfürsten in German, or Bayadere. Those are two of his best, Bayadere and Gypsy Princess. And you get an idea. Bayadere is the one that Kira refers to in We the Living. And you get an idea of what kind of music she liked. I don't mean by my vehemence to imply that she did not like Lehar, but just if you asked her, is The Merry Widow your favorite, she would vehemently say no. Yeah.
Did she like any TV shows besides Perry Mason or Charlie's Angels?
Oh, you took away the two that I remember. Perry Mason and Charlie's Angels, yes, but this is way back. I bet you never heard of it. Did you ever hear of Jack Webb? Well, the original Dragnet, just give us the facts, ma'am. We used to watch that religiously, and I couldn't afford a TV in those days, so I would go to her place to watch the TV. we used to watch that, and she thought it was very good writing, very pointed, very romanticized, essentialized writing. And then there was another one, which I guess would be a silly sitcom, but at the time we thought it was hilarious. It was called Meet Millie. And it was on in the 50s, and the star of it later went on to become the, I think, the receptionist of Dr. Welby. You know, Elena Verdugo? But this is when she was a young girl. And it was really cute. And they had a poet named Alfred who used to make these funny poems. And I remember she enjoyed that. Now that's from the, you know, when I first got to New York, so that's the early 50s. What else? Do you remember others?
The Untouchables.
Yeah, the Untouchables, yeah. The original Untouchables with Eliot Ness, whom she subsequently met. Robert Stack, yeah, Robert Stack, yeah. And he was a fan of the Fountain. In fact, he wanted to appear in it if it was ever put in a movie. There's another one?
You once explained to me why she enjoyed watching Bishop Sheen. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, but what did I say? Yeah, she did like to watch Bishop Sheen, but I can't remember. Fulton Sheen, you know, he had a sort of religious program. What?
Life is worth living.
Yeah, but what the good thing about him was that he took ideas seriously, and he was like the only voice. He was Catholic, obviously, but he was the only voice on TV that talked about issues from a philosophical point of view. He was entertaining and serious at the same time, and dignified. So even though, you know, he was a bishop.
I think you told me that his ability to take abstract moral issues
And concretize, yes. Yeah, he did have that ability to take broad general moral principles and make it specific and concrete. He was definitely watchable. He was not like a televangelist today, you know, who are just these people that spiel out this stuff by rote. He was a thinking, intelligent, philosophical Catholic. And that's rare, you know, whether you're an atheist or religious. Yes.
How did you happen to meet?
I met through a cousin who was a fan of hers, who had met her, and I read The Fountainhead, and I was going on a trip to California where she lived at the time. So I asked, can I meet her? She got the okay, so I did get to meet her. I met her. She was at that time was living in that house by Richard Neutra. I actually met her in that house, and people asked me all the time, "What was it like?" And I swear the truth, I haven't the faintest idea. I did not see anything of that house because as soon as I walked in, I looked at it, and I was only like 17, and I just couldn't think of any other thing. It was just absolutely hypnotic presence. I don't remember, you know, were there paintings on the wall? There must have been chairs because we were seated. I have no recollection. Yeah, there was a fireplace. For some reason, I remember that. So that's how. And then at the end of that, I thought that's the last time I would see her. But I went out, you know, to preach what I learned from her to the various people I was going to see while I was in California, and included a lot of relatives. And they raised all kinds of objections of which I had no clue how to answer. So I asked, could I come back? So I came back for a second appointment, and she went through every objection that I presented and what the answer was, and, you know, why I hadn't known the answer, how to think about these things when I went back to Canada, etc. And so that was the start of it. And then I would come back, like, whenever I could get my father to pay for the plane fare, maybe 2 or 3 times between, that was 51, And I went to New York to visit her 2 or 3 times, and then she had moved to New York, and then I moved there in the fall of '53. Yes, at the back.
If a stranger found himself alone with Ayn Rand, having met her in an elevator or a bus stop, what are the few things about her that strike him? If a stranger found himself alone with Miss Rand.
And knowing who she was or not?
Not knowing.
No, I don't think he'd have any. I don't think just standing there's nothing that I can think of that would, if you see her alive and functioning and talking, and in a context, where she's not ordering groceries, then, anybody would be enraptured. But if she's just standing at the bus stop, I don't think. Now, fans have seen her and got all excited because they recognize her from TV, but that's not. She did not radiate, lightning bolts or anything like that.
Would she start a conversation?
Was she what?
Would she start a conversation?
Starting a conversation with a stranger.
She might, under circumstances. It wouldn't be common, but for instance, she was, I think, on a bus or a train with, other people, and she saw that the woman in a seat near hers was reading the Fountainhead. And there was a picture of her on the jacket on the back. And she, according to her, she leaned forward or got up, and she pointed to the picture. She caught the woman's attention, pointing to the picture and pointing to her. So the woman got all excited and asked for her autograph, and then people, on the bus, started to say, "Who is it? I want the autograph too." But that is certainly not characteristic. Yes?
I really love the story about Frank's childhood where he displays his independence by enrolling himself in public school and getting out of school. I'm wondering if you have any similar stories.
Well, as I told you before, Frank's childhood was a little before even my time because he was born in 1897. So I did not know him, and he was a pretty silent man, so I never got to know the stories about him the way I did about her. She told me some things about him that were extremely impressive, and the one that I can remember is how he became an atheist. And he was very young, like 8 or 7, something like that. And he went to church. He was Catholic. He went to church, and they were talking about original sin. That everyone was born stained with sin, and that was true of everyone down to babies, and that was a result of Adam's sin, etc. and so on. And he came home. Apparently, he said to himself or to his mother that if babies have sin, it means babies have to have lied and cheated, and obviously they can't. So this whole thing is wrong. And he just stopped. He didn't believe in God after that. So he was like Ayn Rand in that sense. He did not take him a long time to get the message. She used to say he was more adamant than she was. He had no tolerance for things that he, not that she did either, but he was like the rock of Gibraltar. I don't know that much that I can think of about his early life. I know he took a freighter around the world, and he worked his way around the world. And he started as an actor, and then he hated the parts that he was given. And he wanted to design, but he wasn't sure of what. He went into floral design. And he used to make the most fantastic, he used to do do lobbies, for new buildings or new businesses or whatever. And he had a card that said Francisco the Lobbyist. And they were just fantastic, beautiful. Also, he sometimes for friends Like I remember a couple that was going on their honeymoon, and he had access to their apartment, and as a wedding gift, he decorated their apartment. But your idea of that would be, or at least mine would be, you put a dozen roses here, or maybe a pot of geranium over there. I got to see that room. You just wouldn't believe it. It was like out of a movie, like a tropical jungle with flowers of every color and exotic shape covering the walls and the ceiling. And it was beyond a work of art, Anyway, then at one point, so it was obvious he had a tremendous sense of color and drama. And at one point, one of the people in the collective said that she could teach anybody to draw. So, several of us decided to try, and we were all pretty hopeless. But he was, really astonishing, and that's when he discovered that what he really wanted from flowers was, painting, creation of a world through color and form, and that's when he began his really serious career and really found himself. So he found himself in that sense late in life, but there was always a very special quality about him or about what he did. So, yes.
Did you see many of his paintings, and what did you think of them?
Oh, I loved his stuff, and I've got quite a number at home of his originals. And he got partway through a painting of me. He never finished it I can't remember what reason, but I posed in the living room there for quite a number of sittings. And then Ayn would call out, "I'm coming." So then I'd have to, put a robe on, whatever. But he never, nothing ever came of it. Yeah. Yes.
Could you say something about...
Oh, I meant this gentleman here. I get this one minute.
Could you say something about Miss Rand's reunion with her sister?
Well, her reunion with her sister was a very negative experience. She had always talked lovingly of Nora, and she had told me that, if something happened to her, I was to make every conceivable effort to try to locate her. She had already made it, but if anything ever changed in the Russian political situation, this had always been her favorite. This was the model for Irina in We the Living. And then her sister discovered her and got to come with her husband, Fedya, for a visit. To make her feel comfortable, Ayn rented a whole entire apartment in the building that she lived in and personally supervised its decoration down to she had taken, Nora did like caricatures, and she had taken a lot with her from Russia. She had them framed and on the walls, so that it would be like a world that she could appreciate. She was just enraptured at the idea that she was going to meet Nora. And after she met her the first time, I said to her, "Well, do you like her?" And she paused and she said, "Well, I think so." And then gradually, pretty rapidly, it came out what a horrible person. The sister had joined the Communist Party and she just lost any remnant of whatever had been good in her. She did not like Ayn's work. And her husband had a serious heart condition, and she knew that he would get the, fabulous treatment here, but would be at risk going back to Soviet Russia, given, the medical inadequacies among everything else there. And nevertheless, she insisted on going back to Russia because that's where she felt comfortable and at home, and she did not like America. So it was very bitter. And in fact, her sister became paranoid at the end and wouldn't let anybody talk to her. And I think I'm the one who got her a cab to get her out of there. And then we found that her apartment, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't go into it. She was not exactly a model housekeeper. Yes.
You mentioned some of the movies you talked to Ayn. She was a big fan of Gary Cooper.
Yeah.
Were there any later movies she was into after the 50s or 60s?
Well, now Gary Cooper's a star, not a movie. You mean?
Well, she was a fan of his movies.
No, there's a lot of his movies she didn't like. He did a lot of westerns and just nothing movies. She liked him as a physical type. And as a matter of fact, he was very close in looks to her husband, or vice versa. They were very much the same type of face, body, etc. And that obviously is one reason why she liked him. Now you want me to tell you movies that she liked?
Were there any movies that stood out that were her favorites later on?
By later on, you mean in?
Like after she made the documentary.
In the 50s or 60s? God, I'm sure there were, but I can't think. Shoshana, do you know of any? I know, that's Shirley MacLaine. I don't remember her ever talking much about that, though.
In the Heat of the Night?
Yeah, she liked In the Heat of the Night, the one with Sidney Poitier. She liked that very much. And she liked Alec Guinness, right. She thought he was very... Do you know who he is? He's dead now. He was a very good actor. And, she loved Greta Garbo, but that's early. But especially Ninotchka was one of her favorites. And she did like Anna Magnani very much. In fact, we used to divide women up into the Garbo type or the Magnani type. And the definition of Magnani was she was, passionate and European. And Garbo was cool and American. So both were good. But, there was the two opposite types. So she liked both of them. Some of their movies were awful, but just as stars. Who else? Oh, yeah, Marilyn Monroe, absolutely. And she liked Marilyn Monroe from the very beginning, before she became a huge star or anything. She thought she was the quintessence of innocent sexuality. And, she was a big defender of Marilyn Monroe's. I think she liked, to a much lesser extent, Farrah Fawcett in the early years when she was Charlie's Angel, right? Who else? I can't remember.
Hepburn?
Oh, yeah, she loved Katharine Hepburn. Which novel is it that she has an actress modeled on Katharine Hepburn?
Vesta Dunning?
Yeah, that's right. Vesta Dunning, I guess, it was Rourke's, one of Rourke's girlfriends in the Fountainhead. Was modeled on Katharine Hepburn, but then she was cut out. Actually, if this may be of any interest to you, she once told me, she said that you have to be really ruthless when you cut your own work. Anything extraneous, anything that's not necessitated by the rest of it. And she said, she told me then about the Vesta Dunning sequence, which I didn't read till after she died. And she said, something like it killed me or it broke my heart to cut it out. It was some of my best writing, but I couldn't keep it in. So the idea was the character psychology was too close to Wynand and Dominic, being a good person that, betrayed, that gave in to fear of the world. But you can read that now. Yes.
Going back to the period when she was writing Atlas, so you said there was that 2-year period when she was writing Galt's speech.
Right.
There were no more pages to read. Did she say anything, do you remember, during that time about how it was going? Would she talk about?
Oh, yeah.
Would she talk about issues she was wrestling with?
No, she never talked about issues that she was wrestling with. But the main thing she would say, is how much easier it is to write nonfiction than fiction. She said, if I had to just take the material in Galt's speech and present it in nonfiction terms, it would be nothing. I could just sit down and deliver it or write it out. She said, the awful thing is I can't start at the beginning. You know, it's got to be the call to the world. It has to be filled with these emotional references and allusions and written with the understanding that Stadler is listening to it, and Mouch is listening to it, and Dagny is listening to it, and so on. She said, I got to build all that into it, and at the same time, give technical definitions of truth and logic and, you know, the foundation of objective values. And that's what really killed her. That's why it took 2 years, is having to put that in the mouth of a hero explaining why he went on strike to the world. But he couldn't say, to understand my explanation, we must begin with existence exists. So it was a monstrous assignment, just monstrous. How she could do it in 2 years is beyond. And then, of course, it had to be tremendously condensed. She couldn't go step by step, but she couldn't also elide whole sections. So just the job of condensation alone, you know. I wrote, what, a whole volume on that, what was in that speech, and mine is a bunch of condensation. So what she had to go through between condensation and the emotional plot element is a nightmare. I can't even imagine that anybody could do that, let alone in 2 years. Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is the first time I've heard that you got Galt's speech as a whole, not piece.
No.
So what was your reaction?
I said, what, you know, people used to say to her, that's just what I always thought. You know, she used to hate that as a compliment. People would come up to her and say, I just loved Atlas Shrugged. You said exactly what I always thought. She'd say, she would say thank you, but then she would say to me, if he always thought that, why the hell didn't he write it down? People just don't know, you know, they think. I think what they're trying to say is, I like the general idea, which I once heard, you know, but they don't have any idea what goes into writing a novel. Yeah. Are we out of time?
Well, you can go.
Oh, look, it's after 10.
I think you can go as long as you want, but I told you an hour.
Yeah, no, well, let's, if there's any last. I didn't realize it was that late. So is that it? Okay, one more.
Did she ever discuss with you how she arrived at her idea that life is the root of value?
You know, she just arrived at that in my time. I mean, after I got to know her, but I can't remember. I remember there was one, I believe her original definition of value is that which one seeks to gain and keep. And in the seeks, there was the implication that there was some kind of conscious or purposeful element to it. And I think in thinking about that formulation, as far as I remember, she realized that the issue is not this inner conscious pursuit, but a certain kind of action. And she changed it then to that which one acts to gain or keep. And of course, as soon as she did that, she moved from the arena of conscious to living organisms as such. And I think, now which came first, I'm not sure, but I know there was that change in the definition of value, and that was right around the time that she solidified the idea of value being inherently connected to life, and not to consciousness. Not that she held this latter view, but I don't think she had fully made that connection. So I guess she did that in the course of writing Galt's speech, I guess. I mean, I might be wrong, but that's the best I can remember. Okay, well, thank you for listening.